Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Targets and Touches Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff DiMatteo, founder of Gridiron Ratings. Today, we're going to talk about Division II prospects for the NFL Draft. And with me is our special guest, Wayne Cavadi. He is the go-to guy for everything D2 football related. Wayne, you've got a litany of credits to your name. I don't think I should go through them all. I'm going to give you a chance to kind of take us through some of your credentials and kind of where you get your background from on these D2 players.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me. I love any opportunity to talk about D2 players, football, basketball, baseball. You give me a platform, I'll try to hype them up a little bit. But basically, long story short, is I've been the D2 beat writer, content lead at Turner Sports since 2015. Over that time, I've gotten out there. I have my own podcast, the D2 Nation, that has had a couple of the guys we're about to talk about as guests on there. I do the Lindy's D2 football preview every year with the top 25. I have my own newsletter, the D2 Report, which if you're watching the show, you may be familiar with if you're a D2 fan. And if there's something that's D2, if you want to have me on, I'm usually there, the guy talking about it, and I love doing it. So there's a lot of places you can find me, and I just love the opportunity to talk about these guys because they don't get a lot of coverage, and that's really what it's all about.
Awesome. Well, we've got a few guys here that are pretty exciting. They may not be first-round picks or first, second-day picks, but some guys that could be late-round difference makers, a few guys that could be maybe not NFL, maybe it's USFL, maybe it's XFL, but we're going to hear their names on TV playing professional football on some level, right? So I know we had a list of players. Who's the first one you wanted to cover?
Well, see, here's the thing you have to remember. Over the last 2 years, small sample size, there's only been 8 D2 guys that have gone, right? So we're looking at it. When you ask for a list of these players, you have to be the list, right? And the other thing you have to take into consideration is a lot of these guys are usually offensive linemen. From a fantasy perspective, we don't care.
It doesn't help.
Right?
Yeah.
There is the Joey Fisher who just went in the USFL, right? Yeah. There's guys like Brett Lang and B.J. Wilson. I think B.J. Wilson is a very good shot to be drafted, but from the fantasy realm, that doesn't do us any good.
Sure.
But the point is, when you discuss those names, you have 3 names that are draftable in the mix. Now you're cutting short the other guys that will be in there. So we had to make sure that we targeted this list right. And obviously one of the guys, if you've been following the helium and the buzz, is Keelan Harris, the wide receiver from Oklahoma Baptist. And, I know you've watched a little bit of him, and he has a Derek Young appeal who went just last year. He's lightning fast. He's in control of his body, and he's a kick returner and a punt returner. So he has instant appeal to be drafted and get into the starting lineup for whichever team takes him. And I'll let you talk about a little bit about what you see before I get into more of it. But I see that it was the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl, and I really think it boosted him. If you remember, when we first asked him, I said I couldn't believe that he declared early because I thought one more year his stock would go through the roof. Sure. I was wrong because he went to that Collegiate Bowl. And he was the talk of the town. I mean, and he shot way up. And now I do think 4th or 5th round, he's probably the first D2 guy off the board.
Yeah, I mean, I got to watch him a little bit, right? And so one of the things I saw is a very twitched up player. This is the kind of guy, when I'm thinking about D1, D2, all of the players in this draft, he's one of about 8 guys that can play on 4 downs. So he can come in, he's going to probably play in the slot, given his size, about 5'9", 179. Mm-hmm. But does a nice job getting depth in zone, does a nice job finding some windows. He controls his speed and varies it well across the field. But here's the play that got me. And I forget the name of the opponent here because I'm not hip with all my D2 acronyms and abbreviations for the different teams and scoreboard, right? But guy's coming across the field on a crosser. He's going left to right, comes all the way across center. Quarterback rolls out, finds him. He just motors past most of the defense. There's a deep safety, takes a phenomenal angle, meets him at the 6-inch line. My man just jumps right over him. It was a Vince Carter, for those of you that are old enough to remember Vince Carter jumping over that guy in the Olympics, right? It was kind of like that. Yeah, he just went right over the top of this guy, and I was blown away. And it got my attention. So, of course, I'm digging deep, right? I'm going to YouTube now. I'm trying to figure out, okay, wait, I need some more highlights on this kid. What's going on? But, yeah, super twitched up. From everything I'm seeing, it looks like there's probably between 4 and 10 teams now that are interested, and that looks great. I think he could be a late-round pick for somebody.
Yeah, and it's like you said, he's one of the fastest guys in the draft, and it's like you said, and what I said earlier is because of that speed, and he's in control of it, right? This is a guy that could go this way, stop on a dime, and then go this way, catch the ball, and then blow away whoever's covering, right? A linebacker, safety, there's nobody that stands a chance against him. But he could, with any D2 wide receiver, the route tree is going to be questionable, especially a fast one, because you become the guy that just goes.
Sure.
Right. And defenses are limited at the opposition is limited at that level. So it gives him the time to be a kick returner and punt returner, which he knows how to do really well, to learn new routes. And maybe it will be a slow burn, right? You know, Adam Thielen, Tyreek Hill, these guys, they weren't the second they stepped on the field. It's like, okay, these are a first round draft pick. But he does have that Tyreek Hill to him because he's super fast. We know that that's what teams look for when it comes to wide receivers. Yep. They like that. Like I said, he has the kind of Derek Young appeal that he could be special teams. He could be a 4-down guy. I think he's a little bit more athletic and talented and in control and will make more of an impact. Young was on the practice squad almost the whole year. But, I think he makes more of an instant impact. And I do, like I said, I think he's the first guy off the board, and there's nobody. There are guys that go into the postseason and take these invites to the bowl games or combines or whatever it is they do. And there's guys that expose themselves. And then there's guys that say, hey, this is who I am. And when you play at the T2 level, you don't always show who you are, but at these combines and bowls, you do. And this is a guy that took full advantage of it and became the top. I read one place they were calling him Hollywood all week at the Collegiate Bowl. Like, this is a guy that put himself on the map. And he's been a great player. He's got over 2,000 yards and 23 touchdowns the last 2 seasons. The guy can play. There's no question. But he's showing he can do it against the tougher competition and the level up competition, like some people call it.
Yeah, absolute yak monster. I love you said Tyreek Hill. That might be a little hyperbolic, but I'm there to co-sign it because I saw the kid's incendiary. And it is the only way to describe his acceleration, his speed, and the way he can leverage his athleticism, especially in the intermediate part of the field. If you're in a deeper dynasty league, I'm good with stashing him. And, I'll take him in the 4th, 5th, 6th round of a rookie draft or grab him as a UDFA and dump him on my practice squad. It takes one team to believe in this kid. Next thing you know, you've got something. So I'll tell you, let's hit the next guy. So, Keelan Harris, obviously the wide receiver. Hey, you got wide receivers. We're not have quarterbacks, right? Not the same school, but there's one guy that everyone's seeing at the NFL Combine, or at least they're seeing his dad right now. Tyson Bagent out of Shepherd. Let's talk about Tyson Bagent. We can get to his dad in a little bit.
Well, Tyson Bagent's a guy. He's the 2021 Harlan Hill Award winner. This is a guy that's been on the radar for a long time. And there's one thing you have to remember. Like I said, I've been covering D2 football since 2015. One other quarterback has gone, Luis Perez. He's still floating around. I believe he's in the XFL now, maybe the USFL. He's been on practice squad. He's probably going to be on a practice squad this summer, but that's what the D2 quarterback does. When you're looking at the D2 big names, Austin Eckler's, Tyreek Hill, Danny Woodhead was a D2 legend. Like, these guys, they're never a quarterback. So Bagent already from step one has the odds against him. But that being said, he's also your untraditional D2 quarterback. He's got the height. He's 6'3". He's got the size. He's about the 240, 215. I'm sorry. And he's mobile, right? He's not a running quarterback first that throws. He's a throwing quarterback that runs. And the things that we learned about him that are important over the past couple of years, he's never had none of his receivers, although they've been good because of the numbers, they've never been a guy that's on the radar to go to the next level.
Right.
So now the question you ask is that because they never put up the numbers because they're not as talented as other receivers? Or is that because Bagent is so good at seeing the field, he's not a guy that focuses on his top receiver? And that's what we've seen. He's had multiple guys, in the same year, multiple guys with more than 500 yards receiving. He sees the field. He has great football IQ. Now, his conference, the PSAC, Pennsylvania State Athletic Conference, is known for offense. Right, it's known for quick offensive lines, and why Joey Fisher went to the USL. He was kind of the unicorn from that conference, whereas it's smaller, quicker offensive lines, quicker plays, quicker this. Yeah. So what we've seen, and the knock that is basically against Bagent now, is when they make the semifinals every year. So when you're seeing those Midwest teams, those guys that have the offensive lines and defensive lines that just beat you in the trenches, he suffers. Right. And his numbers time and time again have been poor in that semifinal game. But here's a guy that got 2021 was the most remarkable thing ever. Back-to-back games, the second round of the quarterfinals. Rams are down. Shepherd Rams are down. This guy rolls all the way out, chucks it 50 yards in the air into the end zone, touchdown. Hail Marys win the game. So what we learned that he could throw it far on the run. He could move, which means we know he can run an RPO if he's taken by that kind of team. And he's athletic. He's not a tree. But again, the very next week in the semifinals, he was overmatched and he kind of disappeared. And I don't know if that's offensive line play. I know he has the ability. But again, it's something that is going to be a knock and it's going to haunt them at the next level. But that being said, I think this is the first D2 quarterback since Luis Perez that gets to go in the draft. Not a UDFA, but someone that there's been enough attention around him, enough scouts on him, enough bowl postseason appearance combines for him. And he's got the ultimate hype man and the national world arm wrestling champion, his father, who, if you've been watching the combine, he's been, like you said, interviewed more than Tyson has.
Yeah, he's been incredible. He refers to himself as the Beast. If you happen to watch the combine coverage, that's he's right there. He was also present during the Senior Bowl, where Tyson had, he had a pretty pedestrian week there in terms of productivity, but that can be true of all the quarterbacks. There wasn't really a quarterback that stood out at the Senior Bowl. Let's just kind of call it what it is. As I watched him, right, through Senior Bowl week, through the practices, watched him, a few of the Shepherd games I was able to find on YouTube, there's some erratic footwork, right? I think this might be one of those things that contributes to his inability to maybe match up against those better teams. He gets a really wide base, almost too wide. As a quarterback, when you drop back, you want to make sure your shoulder width maybe a little broader than shoulder width in terms of your base. He tends to get really wide to the point where it's actually lowering his release angle. It lowers his release point, and that inhibits your accuracy. This seems like a guy who could be drafted, but it wouldn't shock me at all if he ended up in the USFL for a year, practice squatted for a year. He needs a little bit more seasoning, but I see a guy like this, and I'm like, if you've got an established guy, you can grab him and make him your number 3. Stick him on the practice squad and just let him take those reps for, week in, week out, forever and ever as the scout team guy. Mm-hmm. And he has the physical tools you alluded to, escapability. He can get out of the pocket. He can move around. He has the arm strength. The velocity's there. The range is there. The accuracy, I think, could be fixed with a little bit of the footwork stuff. But it's not like he's egregiously bad. I would argue that his accuracy isn't any worse than a guy like Will Levis. And now, to be fair, I don't have a great grade on Will Levis, but that's also, coming from a guy who's going to be a first-round pick versus a guy who's going to be a seventh-round pick, potentially. So there's a little difference there, right? So, like the kid, think he can do some things. If nothing else, I want to see him make the next level because I keep seeing the world arm wrestling champion, his father, on TV because the guy's hilarious. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's probably a wrap on Bajan, unless there's any other notes because he doesn't seem fantasy relevant right now, but could be.
Right, and I don't even think he's a guy. Even if he goes in the 7th round, like you said, I don't think he's a guy that you stash. That you draft in a dynasty league and stash. And you're talking to a guy that in our dynasty league, I took Joshua Williams, which turned out to be great, but that was my D2 guy, and I stashed him, and he wound up being put in the starting, year 1. He became a starting DB for a Super Bowl champion. So, but I don't know that Bajan stat, and that isn't so. Everything you said is true, but I don't know if it's so much that, or if it's just because this is what the D2 guy quarterback becomes a practice squad scout team guy, and they just never get. And personally, some of the NFL talent, some of the third quarterbacks in the NFL right now aren't that great, right? Exactly. They aren't that good, but I still think the lower level play will always be a knock against a D2 quarterback, and whether or not they get that chance, I don't know.
I kind of wonder about a team like a Cincinnati. They have an established guy. But I don't even know who's behind Burrow at this point. And if he's the guy behind that guy, it's probably not the worst thing, right? Because you're going to get a good look on defense every single week. You're going to learn some things. You'll be in a quarterback room with some established guys. Learn how to prepare like a professional and probably clean up some of those mechanics. Because I see a player with a tremendous upside. I don't know if I see a guy that's a week in, week out starter necessarily, but he has the tools where if he stepped in as a spot starter, he might be a guy that comes in, gives you 3, 4, 5 really strong games, and then he's out again when the starter comes back. We look at a guy like Tyler Huntley. Is he a starter every week? Not really. But that's a guy that can come in, give you 4 or 5 really strong starts, and be on his way. Ryan Fitzpatrick, most of his career was like that. And so
Did you know he went to Harvard? They never talked about that.
They not once. I had no idea that he was an Ivy League guy. But with fashion sense like his, it's not even a little surprising. But
another good saying those names. I think about Bailey Zappi, a guy that put up insane college numbers, just like Bajan. He's the D2 record holder in just about every career. Like, he put up insane numbers. Sure. And sure enough, Zappi came in. Zappy hour.
Yeah,
got a lot of hype. Yeah. But then 2 or 3 games later in that second half, defenses were kind of like, okay, right. And he turned into the 3 interception guy. And that, sure, if Bajan gets that chance, he's very capable, like you said. Fill in spot start, light the world on fire, be on every sports talk as the next guy, but kind of is who he is, and we'll come back to that reality.
Yeah, I think physically, when I watch him play, he is, and this is going to be a deep cut for some folks, the best comp I could come up for him was actually Rob Johnson, the Jacksonville Jaguars, Buffalo Bills quarterback from back in the late 90s, early 2000s there. Better as a 2 coming off the bench in relief, as opposed to catching big money and being a starter. He really has a lot to clean up, but there's a very real chance this kid sees the field at some point in the next few years. Might be worth that dynasty stash if you're running a real deep league. If you've got 3 years on a practice squad, if you don't have a better guy there, why not? Stick him down there and see what happens. But he'll certainly be available on every waiver wire, every free agent list, probably in every league. So, we covered a couple offensive guys. For those of you that know, I'm a big IDP, individual defensive player guy. That's my preference. And so we got to cover some defense, right? We got to get after it. So 2 edge rushers that I'm pretty excited about. The first one, this is the guy. This is the D2 dude.
Guy.
Caleb Murphy. We tell you all the trophies, and all the awards he won, but we'd actually be here for 45 minutes going through the list because he's won them all. Like, the guy won every award.
Yeah.
But 6'3", 254. What do you have, like 20 some odd sacks?
25 and a half sacks. D2 record.
25 and a half sacks. That's the most at any level, right?
Yeah.
So the most sacks at any level. This guy turns speed to power. He does all kinds of cool things. But, you've probably more exposure to him than I have. Like, tell us a little bit about Caleb Murphy.
Well, this is a guy like Bajan. I've gotten to see up close. I've been to several games that he's played. Like I said, I've had him on my podcast. We've talked about his style of play. I've talked to his coaches about it. I've talked to their play-by-play guys about his style of play because everybody watches him.
Right.
And like you said, he won every defensive award. One thing that we have to make note out of those awards is that he was the Ted Hendricks Award winner. That is the best defensive lineman in college football. Not D2. Yeah, not D2, not small colleges, it is the first time in 20 years someone outside of the FBS has won the award.
That's awesome.
That's the kind of talent that we're seeing here. So the question, let's start with the plus. He's got the size and he's got the speed and he's got the engine. First thing I asked him is, I said, Caleb, what makes you the player that you are? What is your defensive mindset? And I had him on with the quarterback of the team, Malik Mitchell, and he said, Murphy said, I feel like I have a motor that doesn't stop. And Malik chimed in, he's like, the dude doesn't stop. Like, he does, so there was the confirmation there from a teammate that gets to watch him from the sideline. Right. And that's the beauty of him is, yes, we talk about 25 and a half sacks. He had 39 tackles for a loss. That led all of the nation too. Right. When you see a guy with like 19 sacks, for example, they usually have 21 tackles for a loss, right? There's just 2. He is in the backfield all the time. And it's not just what he's doing himself, tackling and sacking and breaking out. It's the fact that when he explodes on this side, the entire offense shifts to stop him, and then the other guy comes in, right? He's causing trouble when it's not his turn to cause trouble.
Pressure rate is king.
And he's explosive first step off the line. I saw him earlier this season at Lenore Ryan in Hickory, North Carolina. That day he had 5 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. One was a forced fumble recover sack strip. The guy was it was remarkable. And and the Bears, Lamar Ryan has a good team. They're a nationally ranked team. They're a year in, year out playoff team, and they couldn't get anything going. And I'm not Ferris State is the 2-time defending champion. They have a great defense. I'm not knocking anyone else on that defense. It was 100% Caleb Murphy that disrupted that backfield and didn't let anybody find any sort of rhythm or tempo throughout the day. Now the knock is, and what was kind of coming out of the East-West Shrine Bowl, is that the bigger guys, the D1 competition, kind of struggles to get into the backfield.
Sure.
And same with some of the bigger offensive linemen in the playoffs, like the Grand Valley States. Like he kind of he had 1 sack, which is not a Caleb Murphy game. It's like, why didn't he have 17 sacks?
Only 1 sack.
Right.
I mean, no, okay.
Right.
Yeah, most guys killed out a sack in a game, so there you go.
But yeah, exactly. But I don't, like tight ends, like blocking tight ends that move wide, like more athletic, quicker guys that get out on him quicker is where they say he struggles. But I mean, he could beat guys off the line. Yes, he played against D2 competition, which across the board isn't as, I mean, in his region, some of the offensive linemen are top notch.
Sure.
Quentin Barrow just went in the USFL, right? Like, and that's a guy that on Grand Valley State that he went, so.
He went kind of early too, didn't he?
I think so. Yeah, I think he might have been the first guy.
Yeah, I think he was like a first or second round. I think first round pick.
Yeah,
I don't know if he was the first overall, but I think he was a first rounder.
Yeah. So they have those kind of. No, you're right. Yeah. They have that kind of talent in that region, and so if that's the only knock against him, again, right, because of that motor, I think and his desire to play.
Sure.
This is a guy that he transferred from Grand Valley State, which is arguably one of the top 3 D2 football programs with Ferris State. He transferred to their rival Ferris State so he could play with his brother. He hung around so he could win a national championship. Right. This guy isn't a guy that's going to get drafted. They're going to say, you're going to play special teams for 2 years, and be like, he's going to take that challenge. He's going to do it. He's going to use that nonstop motor and make something of himself. And before you know it, we may have the next Matthew Judon on our hands that took time, did his role. Another guy from Grand Valley State, that part of the country that produces these kind of players. And within 3 or 4 years, we have a starting edge guy.
See, and it's funny you mentioned Matt Judon, because when I watched him, I had the same comp. I saw a guy where I was like, this looks like a young Matt Judon. He has some tools he needs to add to the box still. You mentioned he may struggle against some of the D1 guys. To me, it seems like those guys that have a really good drop step and set a good anchor on the edge kind of give him fits, because he's used to kind of winning with a bull rush or a rip and just exploding around the edge, right? That first step is lethal. He's not going to wow you with his 40 time. He's at the NFL Combine, and he ran, I want to say it was a 4.81.
Yep.
And so 4.81's not going to get anyone too excited, but at the end of the day, I'm more worried about that 10-yard split. And I have to get the official numbers on that because I don't think they're live yet. But, on film, this guy, first step, converts that acceleration, that speed to power, blows people up with a bull rush, hits them with the rip, and he's around the edge. I'd love to see him incorporate more spin. I'd love to see him incorporate a little bit more hand and foot. I don't want to say coordination. That's not the right word. But some guys have a certain rhythm to the way they use their hands and feet to swat down an offensive lineman's, paws. Keep the dancing bear from getting in front of him, kind of thing. And when he starts developing a few more of those moves and he can start stacking those moves up, that's when we're going to see a really, really special player. I look at a team like the Los Angeles Chargers being a really great fit. Let him play behind Khalil Mack for a little bit. Let him play behind Joey Bosa for a little bit, 2 of the best to have done it in the last decade and a half. And I feel like that repertoire, that skill set, defensive-minded head coach, that's a squad where if he can land there, he could be playing in 2 to 3 seasons, and he'll be in a spot where he's going to have free rushes. Because at the end of the day, Joe Bosa's not going anywhere. Khalil Mack, he's getting a little longer in the tooth. He could be out of there in a couple of years. If you're telling me you could line up Caleb Murphy across from Joe Bosa, and offensive lines have to shift their entire protection at Joey Bosa, you can be talking about the Matt Judon effect and what he had in Baltimore for a few years. Guy led the league in uncontested pass rushes, meaning he didn't have a blocker in front of him. He was free rushing to the quarterback. No wonder he's hitting him so often, right? And that translated into QB hits, which if you play IDP, that's points. Translates into sacks, that's more points. This is a guy where I don't know that I'll be leaving a lot of fantasy drafts without him, even if I take him in like the 7th round. If you're playing IDP blended leagues, you probably have a 7-round rookie draft instead of a 4. That being the case, I'm going to take him 6th, 7th round, because it's a lottery pick, at that spot. I'll bet on the upside all day. But, to me, late round guy, probably lands on a practice squad this year. I really would love the Chargers as a fit. We'll see, right? Yeah, it's all speculation until we get to April.
And, something we talked about before the show is that it seems like teams that have faith in D2 players are teams that have faith in D2 players.
Right. They just keep going back to the well.
And you got Austin Eckler.
Yep.
A guy from Western Colorado that was very good in college, but he didn't. I mean, it wasn't like he came into the league and everyone's like, yeah, this guy's right. Like it wasn't that kind of guy. And when you have those teams that have that faith in players, that's a good landing spot. That's a team that would go out there and be like, who cares? It's D2. But one other thing, just to touch on what you said, and it's absolutely true, but to reiterate it, he doesn't have those spin moves and it's not because he can't. It's because he's never had to.
Right.
Exactly. So this is a guy that is dedicated to that work ethic, that has that nonstop motor. And like you said, if we give him 2 years as a special teamer, as a backup, whatever it is, to learn and adapt, this is a guy that's going to pick it up like that because he has all the tools.
I love the traits.
Yes.
I'm not wowed by the workout metrics, but some guys just don't test well.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you that don't believe me and kind of want to scoff at that, I'm going to remind you to go back and look at Dalvin Cook. I know it's a different position. Go look at Dalvin Cook's combine and tell me how that worked out. Mm-hmm. He had one of the worst combines I've ever seen of a running back, and he's one of the best in football, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's true across every position. We always find those guys. So I'm not worried about a 4.8 40 time. I'm not worried about any of that. He steps in, he puts in the work, which it seems like based on all the conversations you've had with him, his coaches, play-by-play guys, that's going to happen. This guy could be a starting edge rusher within 2 to 3 seasons. And if you go from your practice squad in a deeper IDP league to being a starting caliber asset on your roster. So Caleb Murphy, definitely a guy to keep an eye on. We've got another one here that's really been kind of lighting up the scoreboard a little more so recently. He doesn't have the same production, doesn't have the same profile that Caleb Murphy has just from a sheer, trophy case standpoint, right? But, who does? Andrew Farmer. So this is the guy at Lane College, at HBCU. He's had a chance to be at the Hula Bowl, HBCU Combine. He's done all these things. And there's no joke, like 14 teams looking at this guy right now. You're talking about 4.72 speed, 38-inch vertical leap. This guy jumps out of the gym for a man that size. 9 feet, 10-inch broad jump. So when I look at that kind of broad jump, you're talking about nearly 10-foot broad jump for a defensive lineman who runs, 250 pounds. And you're talking about a 38-inch vertical leap. That's explosion for days. And teams are drooling over it right now. The Raiders, the Titans, the Colts, a handful of others. Talk to us a little bit about Andrew Farmer.
Well, the one thing about him that we're on the same level. Okay, their conference, some of the D2 conferences, it's just hard to watch on a week in and week out basis.
Sure.
Either some don't have any coverage at all. Some it's not that you're not going to get a close-up view. You're
hoping for some YouTube highlights,
right? And so that's my point, right? My viewing of Farmer is your viewing, right? It's trying to find a clip to understand why he's getting all this attention, and it's like you said, it's the metrics. He's explosive, and he's 6'4", 245, and he can still move with all those numbers that you said. He went to USFL draft, so obviously there's people that like him already, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, I've heard the Raiders are big on him, and it's just I wish I could talk more about him because he's obviously, but I think he's also a Harris, right? Here's a guy that obviously not a lot of eyes were on because of the conference he plays in.
Sure.
But he went to these combines, he went to these bowls, and he made the most of his opportunity. When you could see him, right? He showed you why. And I think he's just taking all of these talents, all of these tools. I think at the next level, he'll be a project, right? He's not going to step on the field and immediately contribute. But I do think he has all the intangibles, all the skills, and all the talent that if he has the work ethic and the drive, he's going to turn into something that at the very least is going to be playing enough downs to give you some fantasy numbers in an IDP.
Perfect. So, I don't know what his official measurements are. I don't know who because he wasn't at the combine, right?
Mhm.
So we don't know if this guy's still 245, is he
Right.
250,
That's
is he
fair.
255. So as a down lineman, I'm worried about that, right? Like if I'm drafting this kid, I'm like, okay, well, wait a minute. How big is he? Does he have to stand up?
Mhm.
Can he cover anybody? Because I see he had like 4 or 5 pass breakups last year. And I think that's a pretty legit deal for an edge player. Only 6 sacks. Like the production profile just seems really up and down. I wonder if they were asking him to do all kinds of different things. Hey, drop into coverage here. Hey, track this back on the swing route. He's not just getting after the quarterback. I kind of wonder with this explosion if they can figure out a way, they being the team that drafts him, to just let him pin his ears back and get after the quarterback. Mm-hmm. Because that would be crucial. And I think it would be huge for IDP performance. It would be huge for NFL performance. I'm not saying he can't cover. We haven't seen enough of him, right? Like he's not on. I can't just go pull up, caddies cut-ups here and pull him up because he's just not there. But I mean, mid-late guy at best. Is that kind of thinking like 5th round, 6th round?
I think probably late UDFA, and the primary reason is because he has that USFL draft, right? Is someone going to go out and of course it sounds stupid, but is someone going to go out and burn an NFL draft pick if this guy thinks maybe after a year in the USFL I can get something more, right? Like I could learn it. So I think that kind of just puts him down as a late draft pick, but I do think he gets drafted. There's too many teams that are eyes are on him. So 6th or 7th round, and I'm not 100% sure of the number, but I am almost certain that you mentioned the sacks. But I'm almost certain he was second to Murphy in tackles for loss. So it's like you said, was he just not assigned to get after the quarterback, or was he just a menace in the backfield still, that he's still getting all these tackles for loss, but he's just not the guy to go get the quarterback?
I think it's a guy to keep an eye on as we get closer to the draft. This is one of those guys where you won't hear a whole lot about him, except for probably some of the deeper circles, so like D2 subreddits and places like that, right? Deep Dynasty IDP subreddits and places like Twitter's probably not going to be the place to hear a whole lot about him necessarily. They're still falling over themselves about Bijan Robinson. So, this is a player, though, that seems like he has a bright future, whether it be in the USFL, XFL, maybe NFL. But with 14 teams fawning over him right now, the bidding war could push his draft stock into the 5th round, and that money on that 4-year contract could blow away what the USFL is able to offer, creating an opportunity for this kid to, maybe he does play on a practice squad and just plainly makes more money than being a starter in the USFL.
No, and that's absolutely true. But this is something I'd have to ask you because I don't know. But where do you rank him in this draft class? I mean, is this a deep class at the position? See, that's something I don't know.
Edge is so deep in this class, and there's a lot of teams that don't have any draft capital.
Right.
So I look at some teams that a great option is my favorite team, the San Francisco 49ers. We don't pick until the 3rd round. We've got a couple of 3rds, and then it's pretty spotty after that. Like there's just no draft capital. We traded everybody away for Trey Lance and Christian McCaffrey and all these guys. Maybe he's the guy that comes in and sits behind Nick Bosa and Ebenezer Ebukam. It's a possibility. Look, this is another guy we're talking about late rounds. If you're drafting IDP, you're drafting Dynasty, he's a flyer pick. You're going to take him, you're going to throw him on a practice squad, and you're going to hope he turns into something in 2 or 3 years. But if you have a better option, you'll probably cut him and then just pick him back up in free agency or waivers. Like, we're excited about the athleticism. We're excited about so many teams being into him, but until he actually gets picked, it's really hard to give great advice on this guy. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that's a wrap on Andrew Farmer.
Yeah.
But, we're kind of running a little long here. So the real question is we had a few other players that we wanted to go over. Who are some guys that might stand out that you might want to talk about, someone that might pop up on a draft board somewhere?
Well, one guy I like is West Florida wide receiver David Durden. He's one of my favorites to watch. Again, there's a lot of question marks on him, not because of his ability, though. He's 6'1", 200. He's been clocked at a 4.40 40. I don't know what it is now. That's an older measurement that I got. But he's a guy that I know has been scouted multiple times by the same team. Okay. Right. So as far as what I heard,
can you tell us who the team is?
No.
Got to protect his sources.
But my point is that this is a guy that if you go watch some video on him, you're going to see highlight reel. The guy can make one-handed catches. The guy can blow the roof off. Right. Like you can find highlight reel catches. But knowing that other people have had their eyes on him. That's what kind of makes him intriguing to me. Now, do I think Harris is going to be the guy that goes at wide receiver? And again, I think there's offensive lineman goes. So now we're narrowing down the D2. I don't know that he's drafted, but he's got a lot of Adam Thielen appeal to me. A guy that didn't get drafted, bided his time, was a UDFA, and then got his chance, and he was good, and his route tree is limited. West Florida's offense was pretty much unstoppable. It was a steamroller. So he didn't have to do a lot, right? But he can. He can. So there's a lot of rawness to him, I guess, is something you could say. But I do think that there were enough eyes on him that he'll at least get an invite to camp and get to prove that he belongs at least on a scout team or something like that. But I don't know if you got to watch him at all, but I know I've told you about it for a long time.
So Wayne's been telling me about David Durden, and I keep wanting to call him Tyler Durden because of Fight Club. I don't know why, but since at least October, we would sit around and watch football on Sundays, and he's like, "Oh man, you got to check out this guy, David Durden," and I'm like, "Wide receiver from D2." I'm like, okay, I'll take a look at him at some point, sure. 2 weeks later, hey man, you got to look at David Durden. Have you looked at him yet? No. Okay, yeah, let's look at him. And it's hard to find any video on him.
Yeah, it is.
There's not a lot of stuff out there, and because not a lot of it's making it to YouTube or wherever else. So I kind of have to defer to your expertise here. I love the size. I love 4'4". If he's got that same Adam Thielen kind of appeal, hard not to love that. The real question becomes, who's coaching him? Mm-hmm. Is this going to be somebody that's getting him ready for the next level? We think about today's receivers. You look at guys in the draft the last few years, a lot of Ohio State players, right? Brian Hartline's become the wide receiver guru.
Right.
And it's like, so now everyone's talking about, who's the receivers coach? Is it Keenan McCardell? Is it Brian Hartline? Like, is it one of these guys? And if it's not, it's almost like the player gets devalued, right? But if you're telling me David Durden's a guy that could be undrafted free agent somewhere, and I look at a team like, well, why wouldn't Minnesota go back to that well, right? You've got an aging Adam Thielen. Why not replace him with a newer, younger version, right? It seems like a great fit. But, need to see something. I otherwise just don't really know much about him. I can't add much, but it's just a name to keep an eye on. So David Durden, not Tyler Durden. First rule about David Durden is don't confuse him with Tyler Durden.
I know you wanted to discuss the running backs quickly.
A couple guys.
I don't think it's as strong a class as there have been in the past, but Ronnie Brown from that same Shepherd offense, he declared early.
Yep.
I've seen the guy have 200-yard games. He was very Christian McCaffrey-esque on the D2 level, right? Sure. This is a guy that could have a 10-reception, 150-yard, 2-touchdown game and only run for 20 yards. So on a fantasy landscape, and let me throw in there something I didn't mention. I am in the world's, probably universe's only D2 football fantasy league, and I did have Tyson Bagent. So there may be a little fantasy bias in the conversation. But Ronnie Brown was a fantasy delight, like he was the guy at running back for a few weeks that just put up ridiculous numbers. But again, what we've talked about there, the PSAC is known for offense. It's known for 50 to 45 games. They're not out of the realm.
It's like the Big 12 of D2.
And that's what makes it fun to watch, like you could easily have like this crazy game. And I think he took advantage of that. And so to look at his numbers, which are ridiculous, is not a fair assessment of who the running back is. And I just don't know. I don't think he gets drafted. Sure. I think by putting himself in the conversation, he probably does get a UDFA invite, but I think he's more suited. One of the guys that we're talking about that maybe more suited for an XFL, USFL run to prove himself that he could be at the next level.
Yeah, don't confuse this Ronnie Brown with that other Ronnie
Brown.
No,
not the Auburn.
Another deep cut. Sorry, we're getting deep cuts here. I hope our viewers aren't totally lost by those. I saw a guy that didn't seem to have great long speed. He seems quicker in short area, intermediate space. He's up the top speed in a couple of steps, so he's moving, but he's easy to track down once he's gotten to top speed. It seems like a lot of DBs were taken. I did get to see a few games. And it seemed like DBs would catch him from behind. You'd have to take some really unorthodox cuts to try and keep some guys guessing, try and find other advantages. Seems like a smart, versatile player. I don't know if he has the physical attributes. When you talk about a guy who, I have him listed at 5'11", 187. if he doesn't have the long speed at that size, it's going to be really hard because you're already undersized, in terms of your just BMI. Not having the long speed definitely hurts. But the fact that he can line up a wide receiver, which he has, he can line up a running back, he catches the football, he runs, you get this kid in the space, it seems like he's a first down waiting to happen. That's great. It's going to take a special scheme, I think, for him to be relevant. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what my take on Ronnie Brown was. But USFL, XFL, he could probably go there and be a star.
Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of like you mentioned with the size and the number. You look at Austin Eckler and Danny Woodhead, right? Austin Eckler, two undersized guys, right? Sure. You look, Austin Eckler has taken it to a level. Like Danny Woodhead, like I said, is arguably the greatest D2 running back ever. Like his numbers are amazing.
Fantasy legend Danny Woodhead,
but especially D2, he became more likable as a player than he ever was. He was never an Austin Eckler talent-wise at the NFL, but he became more likable because of how hard he worked, right? Sure. And he was good. I'm not taking that away. So to kind of be that next guy, you got big shoes to fill. We're not talking about the fourth running back on the roster. If you don't see that immediately from a guy, you have to see that immediately for a D2 running back, especially when you're undersized. You have to be like, yes, this guy is going to play at the next level. And if you don't see that immediately, now with the advent of the XFL and USFL, that's a great landing spot for them to say, hey, well, you didn't believe in me? Let me show you.
Well, he could probably build his body up a little bit more. Yeah. Like Austin Eckler, he got jacked at the NFL level. I mean, my man.
Remember Muscle Hamster?
Yeah, it's kind of like
that. Yeah, it's kind of like that.
So, yeah, I think he's more muscular than Doug Martin was.
Oh,
yeah, there's a whole lot to work with there. But look, if he's smart, he's versatile, if he can put on a little bit more weight muscle-wise, maybe, speed's hard to teach, right? You can't teach speed. Yeah. But here's the thing. If you're running with enough power and you can do everything else, you'll have a future.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what about Emmanuel Wilson? This is another guy that we talked about. He came out and he kind of, crushed the HBCU and the NFLPA weeks. Didn't seem to do much in the games, but he crushed the practice weeks. Size, speed, we're talking about 5'10", 229 is what I have him at. And I have him listed at about a 4'6". I couldn't get the official numbers from the HBCU combine for some reason, but he looks like a 4'6" on film. Mm-hmm. Contact balance kind of seemed like it might be an issue. Pass pro might be an issue. What's your take on Emmanuel Wilson? Am I missing something here?
I think, well, first of all, I think there's a lot. I don't want to say hype, but he's obviously had these invites, so he has eyes on him, and he's, like you said, in the opportunities that he's had, he's made the most of it.
Right.
He did play in a conference that has pretty good defense, and the one thing I noticed about him, even with kind of the traits that you mentioned, the work that he needs to do, he was really good at making people miss, right? And if you can make those kind of plays, it's worth putting your name in the hat and seeing if you can get an invite to camp.
Right.
I just think it's more of a guy that put himself out there, like we said with Harris, like we said with Farmer, put himself out there, impressed, and now is at least on the radar, as opposed to some other senior running backs that, and I'm not being mean, but just senior running backs that played really well, kind of graduated, didn't get that opportunity to say, look at what I could do, and kind of just go drift into the UW DFA unknown and hope for a slot.
Right.
I still don't know that the size and the numbers and the metrics, just I don't know that I hope he's a UDFA, but he seems more for XFL, USFL purposes.
Gotcha. And that was kind of my beat on him. But anytime a guy struggles, especially with that size, he has, 5'11", 229, he's not small.
No.
That's a thick running back. That's kind of what you're looking for at the NFL level. But if you don't have contact balance at that size, to me, it's a massive red flag. I look at that and I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I want you to run somebody over just as much as I want you to sidestep them. But maybe that's something he can develop and kind of figure out how to better use his size to his advantage, XFL, et cetera. So, okay, so that's really the sum of what I had in terms of, players that might have an impact here. Who are some other guys that maybe we're missing that might pop up on NFL draft boards, might pop up in, fantasy sleeper lists? Like, what's left?
One name there's a few names I want to throw out there. One guy at wide receiver that I just want to throw into the mix, and it would be a long shot. But there's a kid, Danny Kittner from UMary. That's in the Northern Sun Conference up there in Minnesota. And he just was amazing. right, at the D2 level. I feel like he's a guy, I've seen it over the years, you know, guys like Henry Litwin from Slippery Rock, and they just were these remarkable D2 wide receivers that do get a UDFA. Sure. They don't last very long, but they get that opportunity. And Danny Kittner's just one of those guys. And, you know, we don't need to get much into him, but I mean, if you just look up his D2 numbers, he was, for a school that really wasn't known for offense for a long time, him and this quarterback just gelled, and they made it happen. Two defenders I want to just throw into the mix is this Sean McCarthy from East Stroudsburg, an edge. I don't know why he's not getting more hype. He's been an All-American for me at Lindy's, first teamer too, last year. He's just got a really quick, explosive stat. He's 6'3", 258. He's explosive first step, but his 40 time is, I think it was 4.9. I think I saw. So not like lighting the world on fire, but he is quick. He's one of those. He gets the sacks, but he's a tackle for a loss guy too. He's one of those guys that's always in the backfield. And then just another name I want to throw out is Malik Hall from Southeastern Oklahoma. And he's a guy I like, and here's why I like him. A, he's good. That's
because he's good.
That's usually the first thing, analysis. But so they played a very fast defense, and he was very fast in that defense. Sure. But they played a 3-4, and he could line up inside and out.
Okay. And
if they went 4-3, he could get down, and he could play kind of edge. Nice. And he played safety. So here we're talking about
all three levels.
I mean, not
hand in the dirt that he's playing.
Primarily a linebacker. Don't get me wrong, but he has.
Okay.
And I watched one interview with him, just a draft profile interview with him, like from the school or from a local newspaper, and he said, if they need me on special teams, put me in there. So just that mentality makes me feel like some team's going to take a chance on him again. From a fantasy standpoint, we're talking 3-4 year project,
right?
Maybe not, but just a name to have on your radar that I'm rooting for. You know, it's a guy like that put in the work, that excelled, really made a name for himself, and kind of deserves at least a look. You can't to see if he can do anything at the next level. But that's really, like I said, when it comes to, we could go into a list of guys. By the time camp opens, there's usually 20 to 30 UDFAs from D2. Yep. By the third week of preseason, there's usually 10 to 11 of those guys remaining, So we could go into a list of guys, but really I think it's like I said, you have to narrow the focus and really attack. Right. And I bet you one guy that we didn't discuss is going to pop up in the draft, and it's going to be like
never fails.
It's
like where did this guy come from? No production, didn't have great measurables, and all of a sudden he's a superstar. Or sometimes it's a guy from like Iowa State, like Brock Purdy.
There you go. Yeah, I'm throwing the Purdy reference.
Yeah, it's like I have to. Cool. So Wayne, we've covered a lot. I know we're running a little over here. Where can we find your work?
Anywhere you want. So the D2 Nation podcast.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, the D2 Nation podcast, which has been on a hiatus for a little bit because my co-host and myself, Bethany Bowman, we've just been, this time of year, it's crazy. You got basketball, baseball, football, all spring practice starting, all happening at once. It's just hard to find a night to do it. But we are on YouTube. We are anywhere you listen to podcasts with that. All you got to do is search D2 Nation. You can subscribe to my newsletter, Wayne Cavadi at WayneCavadiSubstack.com. And
we'll have a link for that in the description of the show also to make it a little easier for you.
And it's free, I should mention. A completely free newsletter, and it gets stuff that doesn't go where you find the majority of my work, which is NCAA.com, through Turner Sports, and that's where I really cover D2 stuff. And pretty soon, I'm starting already. It's hard to believe, but with spring football practice I have begun my research, emails, and conversations for the Lindy's preview. So you could always buy Lindy's college football preview and flip to the back and see. I give you kind of a preview article. I talk to a couple people on their thoughts of the season. I give you the top 25 preseason. I give you 5 games to watch, and then I give you the All-American teams. So you kind of get a preview in May if you want to get on the board early and find some players to watch.
Absolutely. Well, that's awesome. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. This has been really insightful. I think really good D2 content, that something a lot of fantasy drafters don't get access to. A lot of draft nicks probably don't even really get access to. Yeah. So hopefully we can do some more collaboration here in the near term. And, with that, I'm Jeff DiMatteo. He's Wayne Cavadi. This has been the Targets and Touches Fantasy Football Podcast D2 Special.